everybody, it's Holly here today with a new video for MarkerPop, and today we're going to be using the Forest Friends stamp set from My Favorite Things and some of the new Tim Holtz Distress Crayons. We're going to start out with a piece of Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to be using the wonky chevron stencil from My Favorite Things and some of the Ranger white embossing paste. And I'm just going to attach everything down to my craft mat here. And you can use any brand of embossing paste, doesn't matter what kind you have. And you just put it down over the stencil. I kind of want it off. I don't want it to fill up my entire background. I just kind of want it to be here and there. So once I have it down where I want it, I'm going to go back over it with the knife and smooth it out. Kind of like spreading out icing. And then I'm just going to scrape any of the excess that I have back into the jar. And you don't want a really thick layer, just a nice thin even layer is fine. Then you're going to pull it off. And then if you have anything around the edges, you want to kind of wipe that down. And then you also want to make sure you get your stencil and your knife into some water and get it cleaned up right away, so your stuff doesn't get hard on it. I just set that aside to dry. Now we're going to go ahead and stamp the images from the Forest Friends stamp set. I'm using some Memento Tuxedo Black ink on the Nina cardstock for my images. I'm going to go ahead and color them in with my Copics. And for the bear, I'm using E34, E37, E47, and a tiny bit of E49 on the nose. And I'm starting out by adding the E34 just around the edges and leaving the center white because I want that to be my light area. And then I'm going in with my E37 and then a very tiny amount of the E47, and then I'm going to work backwards again, going from my darkest to my mid-tone to my lightest. And I'm going to do that for my whole image. And I'm not really trying to keep the image nice and smooth because it's supposed to be a bear, so there might be some texture in its fur, so I'm using a little bit of a scumbling technique where you just circle around and it kind of just gives a little bit of texture to the coloring. It's not nice and smooth and even. And I'm just going to keep coloring that in, and then I'm going to use a little bit of R20 on the inside of the bear's ears. And I like to, when I'm using dark colors, when I color with that very first light color, I don't take it all the way to the edges. I leave a little bit of a gap there, as you can see. That way when I go in with my darkest color, which is going to be on the outside, I don't have any bleeding because I haven't built up so much color. But you can still get in there and your colors will still blend. Then I'm going to go in and use E37 on his snout, and a little bit of E47 on the nose, and then a tiny little dot of E49 to darken it up some. And then here's where I put the R20 on the ears. And I had a hard time seeing what I was coloring because of my angle with the camera, so I used a little bit of the colorless blender to clean that up. Now for the trees, I'm going to use G03 as my lightest color, G07 as my mid-tone, and then G28 as my dark color. And I'm starting out putting the colors in order in the center and then working my way back out. And I'm leaving a nice white highlight around the outside edge of the trees. And as I'm coloring back in to go from the G7 to the G3, there's kind of a pretty big gap there, so I just touched the tip of the G03 marker to the cap of the G07 marker. My markers need clean, so I just pulled the color off of there. And that's what I use to help blend it a little bit better. And then also just scribble some on the craft mat. And then you can just pick it up directly off the craft mat too, and then it'll come right off your craft mat with a alcohol swab. We'll just take the Copic right off if you want to do it that way too. Just make sure if you do the end-to-end trick with your markers that you scribble them off onto some scrap paper when you're done, just to make sure you're not leaving any color on your marker tip, that the darker color that you might have put on a lighter color, because you don't want it to fade into your marker tip. So I was going to do that, and then I'm going to go back in and color in the bark of the tree. So I'm going to go ahead and use the same colors I used for the bear, the E34 and the E37. I'm just using those two to color in the wood part of the tree. And then once I have my coloring all done, I'm going to go ahead and use the Forest Friends coordinating die sets. And I'm going to go ahead and cut them out, and then I'm going to run it through my Big Shot. I'm just using some low tack painter's tape to hold it down onto the paper. So let's run that through the Big Shot. And then once I have them all cut out, I'm just going to go ahead and set them aside. And then we're going to go back to the piece of watercolor paper that we embossed with the embossing paste. And I'm just going to hit the piece of watercolor cardstock with the embossing piece on it with the heat gun on a low setting just to make sure it's dry. Then I'm using the first Distress Crayon set number 1. And I'm using the Twisted Citron, and I'm just scribbling that across my embossing paste. And then I squirted a little bit of water down on my craft mat, and I'm just using my fingertip. A little bit of water, and I'm just rubbing the color around over that embossed area. And if you get too much color, you can dab it off while it's still wet. Then you can add more crayon to get a little darker color if you want as well. And the finger works the best, just a little bit of water on the end of it. You don't want to rub too hard because you don't want to rub your embossing paste off. Then I'm going to put down some Mermaid Lagoon at the top part. And I'm going to do the same thing, just dip my fingertip in the water and rub that around to spread the color. And then I'm just going to heat, I spritz it with a little bit of water, and then I dabbed with a paper towel to kind of get some more color off of the white chevron embossing paste layer. And then I'm just going to heat it with the heat tool again. And I'm using a heat tool that has a low setting and a high setting, and I'm using the low setting. Then I'm going to go ahead and die cut the watercolor panel with the large stitched wonky die from My Favorite Things. Now, you want to make sure that your panel is dry, or you wipe off your cutting plate, because that color can transfer to it, and then when you put your white paper through again later, you could end up with distress ink all over your project. Then I'm using a craft piece of cardstock, and I'm just folding it and cut it to 4 1/4 by 11, and I'm just folding it and top folding it, and then I'm adding some Scotch foam tape to the back of that watercolor panel. I'm putting a lot of it on there because it is kind of warped a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the panel to the craft cardstock. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment from the same set. This one says, sending you a birthday bear hug. And then I'm going to use the Blueprints 27, and I'm going to use this banner shape that's in it to cut it out. And I use VersaFine black ink, and I just hit it for a second with my heat tool just to kind of set it, because I'm notorious for smearing that VersaFine ink. I'm going to run that through my Big Shot. And if you look closely at my piece of white cardstock there, you'll see splatters of that distress ink all over it. That's why I was saying you want to make sure you clean it off or make sure it's dry. Then I'm just going to add some foam tape to my sentiment. And I'm going to put that down. I'm just lining up it on the card front there. And then I'm going to add some Tombow Mono Multi Glue to the back of one of the trees to glue that down. And then I'm also going to use some foam tape on the back of the other tree. And a little bit of foam tape and glue on the back of the bear to place him down as well. And then we all know that I can't finish a card without some of the sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. So I'm going to use the mix, which has 3 sizes in it, and some Tombow Multi-Medium Matte. Ranger Multi-Medium Matte, not Tombow. And I'm going to go ahead and put the sequins down with my tweezers. I'm going to use the tweezers. I had a little trouble with this one sequin. It just didn't quite want to work, so I fidgeted with it for a little bit. But I just added 5 sequins just to kind of give it a little bit of sparkle when you hold it up. And that pretty much completes my card for today. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll check these products out on the MarkerPop site, and I will see you again soon next week. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.